Hello again and welcome to episode 3 of the Commodore 64 Budget Publisher Showdown, a competition pitting the 3 biggest publishers of budget games on the Commodore 64, Mastertronic, Firebird and Codemasters, against one another in a series of rounds where we compare their games in a variety of categories. If you've not already done so, please check out episodes 1 and 2 where you'll get an overview of the 3 companies and also the format of the competition. Let's now take a look at the leaderboard, which shows the standings after 6 rounds, and as you can see it's very close between the 3 publishers with just 2 points separating them at the moment. Mastertronic lead the way with 37 points, Firebird in second place with 36 and Codemasters in third place with 35. Each of the publishers has also won 2 of the 6 rounds contested so far. So with nothing between the 3 of them as it stands, this episode could be pivotal in deciding the overall result. In this episode we're going to be looking at sports and racing or motorsport games, and joining me this time to look at these games are 2 gentlemen who love sport almost as much as they love their Commodore 64s, Colin Poole and Simon Boggy Burton.
Hello.
Hi there.
So before we get started guys, perhaps you'd like to let the viewers of this video know a little bit more about yourselves. Colin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'm Colin from the Let's Talk Retro YouTube channel that I do with my friend James. And I've also recently put a book together on Mastertronic called The Commodore 64 Collector's Guide to Mastertronic.
Yes, I did want to say congratulations, Colin, on reaching the Kickstarter funding target in less than 24 hours. I think that's a great achievement. It does show that lots of people are interested in the book. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more later on about how that book came to be and what you did to work on it, but we'll crack on with the reviews and stuff first and maybe talk about that a little bit later. Simon, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Simon Boggy Burton. I've been into video games since I was quite young. Got a Commodore 64 in Christmas '84, and I collected games and just bought things all the way through. And I'm the admin on the Retro Games Forever Facebook group. And then obviously, as Matt knows, as I've known Matt for a long time, we've done all the replay events. We did all the Play Expo shows and still doing things in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. As Simon says, we've been friends for a good number of years, so you can expect a little bit of banter during this episode, I would imagine. Okay, so first question for you guys before we start looking at the games in a bit more detail, and that is just to let us know a little bit about how you got interested in budget games, your experiences of budget games back in the day, or maybe even collecting them in more recent times. Si, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I've obviously been at school when I got my 64. Budget games appealed to us pupils at school because you maybe couldn't afford the full price games on a disc in those days, especially like Microprose games. They were like $14.95. So you think the 15 quid was quite a lot of money then. But then suddenly these budget labels started appearing. And, you know, at the start, they were obviously just original games. And then later on, they reissued what were full price games as budget games themselves. And if you missed things on the first time round, you could get them again. But no, price wasn't everything. But it did have a big thing on for us with only pocket money in our pockets. $1.99, maybe $2.95 for some games. It was just a big plus. You got a game, you hoped it was half decent. I mean, I got most of my games based on Zap reviews, to be honest. And if they liked the game and it was pretty decent, you know, a reasonable percentage, and it was $1.99, you'd take a punt on it. I didn't collect them particularly. I didn't have any loyalty to any particular publisher. Again, if Zach liked it, I pretty much was going to like it. So yeah, a lot for me was just price point, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the real big point when we were kids, was you perhaps didn't have a lot of money to spend each week, so why not buy a game for £3 and take a punt on it? And some of them were good and some of them were not so good, as we'll probably get into as we go through the games in this episode. So Colin, what are your sort of memories about budget games in particular?
Well, my first computer was a Commodore 16, and Mastertronic, obviously, they supported the Commodore 16 probably more than most publishers at the time. So that's where I first come across the budget sort of idea of games. Then I had some friends that had a Commodore 64 and I used to go around their house, and I remember the sort of the first games I played on the Commodore 64 were like Kickstart and Action Biker and things like that. And again, like Simon, I didn't really have any sort of label that I preferred the most. Just bought the games again like that. Zap probably recommended, because you knew that if they recommended it, it was probably going to be good.
Absolutely. I mean, they got it right more often than not, although I think there's a few games that they gave quite good scores to that weren't perhaps as good as they thought, and vice versa, and we'll definitely be looking at some of those games over this episode and future ones as well. Thanks guys, that was great. Thanks for your memories on collecting or playing budget games. So we'll now crack on with our competition, and as I mentioned, all this episode's games are about sports or racing, and we're going to kick off with what is round 7 overall, but our first round today, which is football games. Every publisher worth their salt, budget or otherwise, put out a football game in the 80s, and Mastertronic, Firebird and Codemasters were no different. So representing Mastertronic is Five-A-Side Soccer, Representing Firebird is European Five-a-Side, and representing Codemasters is 4 soccer simulators. So first up, we're going to look at Five-a-Side Soccer. This was a Mastertronic added dimension mad game released in 1985 for $2.99, but this is a little bit of a cheat for me because this was originally released by Analog Software, but I'm going to circumvent my rule about not including re-releases because although it is the same game as the Analog version, it was slightly modified to have Mastertronic on the title screen and also the advertising hoardings in game. So while it wasn't originally released by Mastertronic, it is unique to Mastertronic in that respect. I also think some of the speech that was in the Analog version was actually removed. So there we go, that's my cheaty sort of way of getting this one into the competition so that we could have a football games round. This game was coded by Ken Grant and it's a side view horizontally scrolling football game. Each game lasts 10 minutes with full crowd atmosphere and an announcer to keep you up to date with the action on the field. In addition to playing a full game, you can also take part in a penalty shootout. I couldn't find any reviews of this one for the Mastertronic release, but the Analog version was reviewed by Zap and they gave it 60%, saying it's not great, not bad, especially if you like football simulations. Computer and Video Games also reviewed the Analog version, saying it's potentially a good game for a nice price, and they gave it a playability score of 7 out of 10. This is not a great football game in my opinion. It is, however, a very rare football game because this is the rarest of all the Mastertronic games, I think. Certainly when I was collecting them, I'd given up on actually ever finding this game, but then a guy in Germany swapped me a copy for something I had. Yeah, this is a really rare game. It's not a good game though. Graphics are functional, but they're not great. But in terms of playing the game, it's got virtually no real team play in it. You don't ever pass to a teammate. You just kind of run from one end of the pitch and shoot, rather like playing kids football. It has got the advantage that players are faster without the ball than with, so you can catch up with a player that's got the ball. I found the goalkeeper to be either completely amazing, pulling off amazing saves, or just absolutely terrible, where you can walk the ball in from about 2 inches away. You can't choose a player. The computer does the selection of your next player for you, and it's a bit ropey. It picks players from miles away from the ball sometimes. And I found the key to success in this game is persistent fouling. So if you tackle someone and then get up and foul them immediately afterwards when they've lost the ball, you can then get the ball off them and just run at the goal. And I also found it's got some weird rules in it, like there's a penalty for tripping, basically a foul, but the fouled team gets a kick off when you get that penalty. And also there's a penalty for fighting. If you do persistent fouling, eventually the opposition player picks a fight with you, and bizarrely when that happens, both teams get a penalty, so you can actually start a fight with someone and end up 1 goal up if you save their penalty but score yours. So that was just bizarre. Speaking of penalties, the penalty shootout that's added in as a bonus in the game is just pure luck. You can't even see the opponent running up to take the penalty, so you've got no idea where it's going to go. So overall, I thought it was a pretty average game, and I suspect like most football games, this one's probably more fun as a 2-player game than playing against the computer. So those are my thoughts. Colin, what were yours on this one?
Yeah, mine pretty much the same as yours, really. Like you say, it ends up being more like a game of chase the player with the ball rather than actually football, you know. The other thing, I don't know whether you've noticed that five-a-side football, I always thought of it to be on a smaller sort of pitch, a lot more close-up, a lot more skillful, but this is on probably the biggest pitch I've actually seen in a computer game. It's absolutely massive. And like I say, you just spend all your time chasing the guy with the ball. It's impossible to get a passing game going because people try to pass to another player, they just sort of ignore it. And yeah, it's just absolutely crazy, really. I mean, the players are quite well animated, I suppose. There's a bit of speech in the game, which probably back in the day would have been amazing to hear the speech then, but obviously today it's sort of like a take me sort of, a game probably going to have some sort of speech in it.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. Si, what were your thoughts on this one?
Well, I tried the penalties first when I first went into the game, and it's a nice idea, but it'd be just better if you could actually have a little crosshair and just choose a part of the goal, like on some later games and some around that time, you could just pick a spot and try and get the ball there. But every time I shot, it just seemed to go halfway up the goal, and their keeper nearly always saved it. And when they shot, you as you say, have to wait until the ball's moving, and you've either gone the right way and a bit of luck and you get it, or you've no chance of stopping it. But I did like the idea of a separate sort of penalty team. The game itself, you've covered most of it. I was actually gobsmacked when I had a fight with another player. We both got a penalty. I was like, what the hell is going on?
What was that all about?
Yeah, I had it on the easy level, and I did still find I still lost the game. Once I lost the ball and then the CPU chose me the wrong player, by the time I could move up the pitch, the guy with the ball had passed me, and then I had to try and do it again. And then, like on international soccer, it's just the next one that comes on the screen. But on this one, it's, as you say, it just chooses random. He just ran through every time and banged it past my keeper. But do you know what? As bad as it seems, I quite enjoyed it for some weird reason. Don't know why. I did score quite a few goals, but I still managed to lose the game in the end. But I don't know, it was something a little bit fun about it. Just a bit more care and attention to detail, and I don't think it could have been a half good game, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. It wasn't absolutely awful. It was a reasonable approximation of a game of football. I think passing didn't really come into football games until a few years later. You know, they were all very much like this, where generally speaking, you just get the ball and run towards the goal and try and score. So maybe we're being a little bit harsh on it in that respect. But for a $2.99 game, it probably wasn't too bad.
Really, I mean, it's strangely quite enjoyable, even though we're sort of having a good moan about it. It's actually quite enjoyable when you do play it.
I guess that's just, if you like football, you'll try and play football as best you can, no matter how bad the game is. So let's move on to the second football game. This is the Firebird game, and this is European five-a-side. I've got no idea why it's European specifically. It just seemed like any other five-a-side football. But anyway, this was a 1988 release in the Silverbird packaging, costing £1.99. This one goes by the name Five-a-Side Footy on the title screen, and it was programmed by Dave Kirby based on a design by Timothy Kloss. It also features music from Steve Barrett, whose name we've heard several times during this series already. In this game, the action is viewed from an aerial perspective and the pitch scrolls vertically. In terms of the magazine reviews, Zap were not impressed with this one at all. They gave it 15% and said it's definitely not for fans of the sport. The unruly control causes instant frustration. Commodore User Magazine also reviewed it and gave it a middle-of-the-road score of 6 out of 10, saying it's far from the best footballing game ever, but it's certainly one of the cheapest. If you're a fan of the sport and fancy a quick game against a friend or the computer, you could do far worse. So differing opinions from the magazines on this one, but what do we think? Colin, would you like to go first on this one?
Sure, yeah. This one sort of reminded me a lot of Micropro Soccer. It's got that sort of look to it if you're looking down from above. And it starts off with the main sort of screen. There's some decent tunes playing on it, which are football related. There's like Here We Go, and the West Ham classic Forever Blowing Bubbles. You know, they're not bad tunes, like the way it plays them and stuff. The graphics on it, they're not too bad. It's quite sort of chunky sprites, but the pitch just looks a little bit bland. And also I noticed that when you're playing, that the players sometimes they just sort of seem to butt into each other, and then the ball just seems to get stuck in between them or sort of glitches around them a little bit. You can change your player on this one, so like sort of press the fire button to select another player, so you can actually do a bit of passing on this one. But scoring just seemed a bit pot luck. It was a bit hard to work out whether you were going to score. And another thing, there's sort of no radar or sort of thing that you used to get on a lot of football games where you could actually see where your players are to try and pass to. So you're just basically kicking the ball in a direction and hoping that another guy was going to be there. But you know, you could play a half decent game of football on it, I suppose.
Yeah, some of the things you said there I was going to mention as well, but let's see what Boggy has to say about it first.
Yeah, like Colin said, as soon as it came up, I thought Micropro Soccer, the cartoony type picture, which is quite colourful. Again, the music as well. I noticed the Here We Go and Bubbles. Yeah, that was good. And the most annoying thing for me playing it was when you kicked the ball quite a way down the pitch, it just disappeared off the end. Scrolling couldn't keep up. Half the time it hit the sides or whatever before I'd even seen it and come back into play. I found the fact that you didn't kick off from a centre spot, you kicked off from the edge of the centre circle strange. The actual centre spot was a line as opposed to a round spot. So that was a bit strange. I found the shooting was quite poor. It was either the lob shot or just passing it. There was no real control over the shots. You either hit it up and it just went high in the air and just bounced out and the keeper got it, or you just tried to cut across the keeper. I didn't find that particularly engaging. But again, it wasn't that bad. You know, I gave it a few games because I got into it quite a bit, but it just made you want to put Micropro Soccer on, to be honest. But
yeah,
I'd probably give it another go after we've done all this, just to try them again. I don't know, I seem to be a sucker for football games, no matter how bad they are, apart from maybe World Cup Carnival. But yeah, you know, give it a go. Again, it was just a few little annoying attention to detail. Mix this one and the last one, so I mashed them up together. It might have been all right.
Yeah, or really, really bad, depending on which bits they combine. Well, the first thing I've got to say about this one, and I found this when I did it on my Silverbird series, is it won't work on a Commodore 64C. Now, I know you had this problem, Si. Colin, were you able to load it on an original computer?
Yeah, I've only got a bread bin, so
okay.
It seemed to load okay on there when I tried it.
Yeah, so it won't work on a Commodore 64C. It loads up, you can change the options on the menu and all that kind of stuff, and as soon as you start a game, it just hangs. So that's not good for starters, so I had to play it on an emulator. You've already mentioned the music on the title screen. The title screen itself is pretty bland, but the music was good, and you've got some game options like the match length and the pitch colour, which were nice enough, I suppose. I think you've already said this, but I think the player and ball animation were pretty nice. But the thing I noticed that I don't think you mentioned is that the players and the ball travel at the same speed. So if you kick the ball forward, it's impossible to catch it again. You have to just hope the ball ends up somewhere where you can get on the end of it. And I found it quite hard to save shots, quite hard to score from point blank range as well, because the keeper's always there when you're playing against a computer. And I think you said this as well, Si, keeping the ball on the ground was quite difficult. A lot of the time you kick it and it just go up in the air, which is a bit odd because five-a-side typically technically it's a foul if the ball goes above head height, but there you go. I did find I could score some pretty good goals by bouncing the ball off the wall and the usual diagonals into the far corner. That usually fooled the computer more times than not, so that was good. And I also found that once I was ahead, I could just sort of dribble the ball into the corner and the computer never tackled me, so you could actually just put the ball in the corner and wait for the clock to run down. It's not a very fun way of playing the game, but if you really wanted to play to win, then you could do that. So for me, much like the first one, very average game, but again, it might be more fun if you've got another human player to play it with.
Do you say this one came out in 1988?
It did, yeah.
And then it didn't work on a 64C. Wow, that's interesting, because that's when most people would have had one of those by then. So to have it not work on the newer machine chipset is a bit weird.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it might be a certain hardware revision or something like that, but I imagine they got quite a few returns off the back of that. Well, yeah, interesting game, if only for that reason. So let's move on to the final game in this round, which is Codemasters 4 Soccer Simulators. So this is 4 games in one package. Now this one was originally released, and I didn't know this until I was planning this series. This one was originally released in 1988 for £9.99 as a Codemasters Gold release, and due to poor reviews, which we'll get on to in a moment, it was re-released by Codemasters for £2.99 in 1990, and that's the version obviously that we're considering here as a budget game. The coding on this one is credited to the Codemasters Squad and Smart Egg Software, with design credits including David and Richard Darling, Gavin Rayburn, Peter Williamson and Mark Bullock. The music is provided by Matt Gray and David Whittaker. As the name suggests, this is a collection of 4 different football games. 11-a-side soccer is a simulation of the default soccer rules. Indoor soccer is played with 5 players per team with different rules to the outdoor game. Street soccer is played in the streets with very few rules at all. And finally, Soccer Skills is a training game in which the player can practice penalties, sprints, corners, goalkeeping skills and more. All the games except Soccer Skills support up to 2 human players per team and can be played against the computer in 3 difficulty levels. It doesn't look like this game was ever reviewed at budget price, but when Zap reviewed the full price version, they gave it 24% and said it's a package that would be of questionable value at budget price, never mind a tenner. Commodore User also reviewed that full price release and gave it 46%, but they did say this is one decent budget game tarted up to look like a full price game, and went on to say you should invest your money elsewhere at least until Codemasters start selling Street Soccer for a couple of quid, so they may well have reviewed the budget release more favourably. So, 4 games for the price of 1. Simon, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, the value for money is very good. Obviously, it depends on how good the games are. I'll just quickly go through the actual different games as I played them, literally in the order they are on the menu. I thought it was okay. 11-a-side one wasn't too bad. Again, this is like Micropro Soccer, similar pitch and a similar overhead view. Again, like the other game, the ball very often will disappear off the edge of the screen out the playing area. The goalkeepers, again, like some of these games we've reviewed, could pull off a decent save or just let the ball straight through them, which is really annoying. The inertia I noticed on this one as well, on whichever version it was, the player moves slightly slower and speeds up, and as you turn it's got a slight slowdown, so I suppose they're trying to get a little bit of realism there. The indoor soccer, I actually quite like that one. I thought it was a bit better. It's just, again, bouncing it about, trying to get angled shots. The thing that annoyed me about the goalkeepers in this, they can't come out. So when I took control of the keeper, I couldn't move him out to stop the opposing computer guy shooting. I just had to stand on my line. I couldn't run out and try and block it. But yeah, that was okay. The training game, yeah, it was all right. I don't know what I can say about it, really. It's not the sort of game you see mostly on a football game. You do weight training and doing all the little bits and pieces. It's a bit different, I suppose. I played it 2 or 3 times because I want to try and beat my times. The street soccer was okay. It's trying to be a bit like the epic street sports soccer, I suppose. It just provides a bit of options and obstacles on the pitch, cars and a few bits of housing. You're just messing about on the pitch. It's got extra side bits on it in the street. I thought overall, though, the value for money is good. It is playable enough, to be honest. Trying to beat your high scores in certain parts, especially the training, is not too bad. As you say, with most of these, it's probably fun with another human player. But I don't think it was all that bad. I was treated a little bit harshly. But then when you think it was a $9.95 game, and I bought that game for $9.95, I think I'd have been straight back to the shop having it out with them.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There's something you mentioned about scoring. I don't know if you noticed, but you get a score for everything you're doing in the game. So the more you dribble in the ball in the football matches, the more score you get, and you actually can get on like a high score table at the end. So that was a bit unusual. It's like you actually just get points for playing football, not just the actual score in the game. I have to agree with most of what you said, really. I did like that this game's got a lot of options on each mode. Obviously 1 or 2 players, you've got match length, bounciness of the ball, things like that. So I thought in terms of presentation, the title screen was nice, with music on each one and lots of game options. That was all very positive. The 11-a-side, as you say, basically a Micropro Soccer clone, but not as good. You've already mentioned about the scrolling, not keeping up with the ball. Also, the players kind of slide around the pitch almost like they're on ice. They're almost uncontrollable at times, or so it feels. The keeper generally finds it very hard to save shots, and diagonal shots nearly always score, but that's pretty much a given for games of this era. The indoor one, pretty much the same issues as the other versions. I also noticed it's got the rule about not being able to go into the opposition box, which was quite a nice addition for an indoor soccer game, but I also found that the computer seems to break them. The computer does actually run into the box and score now and then, so that's not very good really. It's not very consistent. I really like the street soccer. I had this game when I was a kid and I really enjoy the street soccer. It's got the same issues as the others in terms of the playability, the moving around and stuff, but I like the fact that you can score some goals off fences and the sides of cars and things like that. It's a bit glitchy in places and the ball can get stuck in certain areas, but I still really like it. It's a great addition and actually makes the thing worth buying, I would say. Finally, the soccer skills, pretty poor overall. It's kind of a joystick waggling kind of thing, you know, hyper sports style, and some boring football drills where you just have to run up and down the pitch by waggling the joystick. So not really a fan of the soccer skills. I found the player disappeared in some of the football skills events as well, so it wasn't very well programmed, but I did like the animation on the weightlifting sections, and also you had to rotate the joystick to do like arm curls backwards and forwards, so that was quite an original way of controlling it. Overall, I'd agree with you, Simon. It's not brilliant by any means, but for a budget game you've got plenty of value and plenty of fun for £2 to £3, I think. So let's round this round off with Colin. Your thoughts on 4 soccer simulators?
Well, really, I've not got much more to add to what you guys have said. I quite enjoyed the street soccer. Thought the graphics were quite well drawn in that. Like you say, it's a little bit glitchy. Sometimes the ball gets stuck on a car or something. You can sometimes free it up if you just keep kicking away, trying to bounce it sort of out. But yes, I quite enjoyed that. And then, like Simon, I think I enjoyed the indoor soccer. That was okay. Still not as good as the indoor soccer that's on side 2 of Micropro Soccer. 11 aside was just, like I say, like Micropro Soccer, but not as good. I thought the soccer skills added a bit of variation, something a little bit different when you've been playing all those football games. Again, not great, but just added a bit of variation.
Yeah, I think we're all fairly agreed there. I think you can't really argue for £3 for 4 football games. If you're a football fan and you've got someone to play with, you know, it was a pretty good product to pick up at budget price. Thanks guys for your thoughts on those 3 football games. So that's the end of the first round of this episode and round 7 overall. Now it's time to give me your rankings for these 3 games from worst to best. So Simon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. I'd probably put the Euro 5-a-side the worst. The 5-a-side soccer as the second one because I quite enjoyed it. But for the variety and what was on offer, especially for $1.99, I'll say 4 soccer simulators probably the better option of the 3 games.
Okay, thank you very much. Colin, any change from you in the opinions?
Well, third place again, I would put European 5-a-side, but it's a close one between 5-a-side soccer and 4 soccer simulators. But I think, I would agree with Simon. I'd put 5-a-side soccer second and 4 soccer simulators in first place.
Thank you. And for me, it's exactly the same. So yeah, European 5-a-side, it's not a good game anyway to start with, but the fact it crashes means it's bottom by default. 5-a-side soccer, again, not a great game, but it's got a few nice touches, and the weird rules about fighting were quite entertaining when I found those as well. And in first place, it's definitely 4 soccer simulators. Yes, they're all pretty average games, but 4 mediocre football games are better than 1, and it's worth it for the street soccer alone. So we're in complete agreement there, and that means the results of round 7 for the football games are that in third place with 3 points is European 5-a-side, in second place with 6 points is 5-a-side soccer, and winning this round with 9 points is 4 soccer simulators. Okay, let's move on to our next round then. That's round 8, and this round is all about other sports, and we've got a pretty mixed bag of sports here because we've tried to pick what we think is the best sports game from each publisher, but that does mean there's some very interesting, not necessarily what you call traditional sports in this round. So in this round we've got for Mastertronic 180, and for Firebird we've got Raging Beast, and for Codemasters we've got Pro Tennis Simulator. First up then, the Mastertronic game is 180, or 180 if you prefer to say it that way. Released in 1986, again it's in the MAD packaging, so it costs $2.99. The game was coded by Andrew Routledge for binary design, and the music was provided by frequent Mastertronic collaborator David Whittaker. The game has a number of different modes, with 8 opponents waiting to take you on in the tournament mode, a 2-player option for when your friends want to join in, and a practice game to help you win when they do. Against a computer you'll play in a championship knockout, and to carry off the tournament you have to beat 3 opponents. The practice game takes the form of a round-the-clock challenge, where you must hit each number in sequence from 1 to 20 in a limited time. The game received positive reviews from most of the gaming press at the time, with Zap giving it an overall score of 70% and saying it's far from outstanding but good fun. Commodore user gave it 8 out of 10 and named it their cheapo of the month, saying Mastertronic have produced what now stands as the best darts game on the Commodore 64. And Computer and Video Games were even more impressed, giving it a playability score of 9 out of 10 and a value of 10 out of 10, saying it's amazing value, miss it at your peril. So, I know you're a fan of this game, Simon, so do you want to kick us off with this one?
Yeah, I've not been funny. Whenever I fire up the 64 for a little game session, it comes on at some point. A bit like Drop Zone, it's in my permanent playing list. Yeah, I love it. You know, the graphics are a bit, you know, if people say, oh, Spectrum is going about the 64 being brown and all that kind of colours, yeah, just look at the pub in this. It's all chocolate browns and yellows and very blocky. But the dartboard is quite well drawn. It does look like a dartboard, even the numbers do look like they're a wire. The hands are pretty standard for dart games, but the way it moves, it makes it quite a challenge just to make sure you get it into exactly the right point. But what I find is with practice, you can be pretty accurate with this one. Once you've worked out where the dart just does a little arc, you know exactly where to let go to get the part of the dartboard you want. I do find that in the earlier rounds, once you've got used to it, you've no real point to them because you can win them every time. But the final, this is a bit about the whole game, that you always play this guy called Jammy Jim, and he gets a 9-dart finish every time. So one mistake and it's curtains for you on the final. But I love the idea of that because you just know one error and you're done. So I really enjoy it. Music's jolly, stumpy, it comes into my head occasionally. I'm not singing it at the moment, but I won't sing it to you. And then you've got a round the clock option as well, where you've just got to get round from 1 to 20 in a very short, in 2 minutes, I think it gives you, which is quite hard. You've got to be really accurate to get that. And then you start panicking towards the end of that as well to try and finish it. And yeah, just as a darts game, I think it's accessible. You either like darts or you don't, but I think it's a good game just to have a bit of fun. And you can play 2-player on it as well, which is good. So yeah, fun and definitely worth its $2.99 price tag.
Yeah, I definitely agree it's worth its $2.99 price tag. Colin, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a game that, like Simon and I had back in the day, and used to really enjoy it. Like he says, Jammy Jim, yeah, he's jammy, and he's like 9-dart finish every time. I did actually beat him once, I think. So I've only ever beat him once back in the day, a long time ago. I remember like my heart was in my mouth throwing the final dart. So like Simon says, the readers get to you. I had my own little system there. You've got to push up to start your hand moving across the dartboard. I used to like sort of push up and diagonally to the right a little bit, then back to the left, and then press the fire button to send the dart on its way. And then most times when you could get a treble 20. Yeah, it's a nice game to play on. It's good with a friend as well. You know, sort of even better with a friend because you don't have to put up with Jammy Jim beating you all the time. And you've got, like Simon says, the round-the-clock game, which is quite fun. Sort of the countdown comes down. There's a noise every time a second goes down, so that puts the pressure on as well to try and get the dart in as quickly as possible. You know, the title screen music, it's catchy, sort of thing you would expect to be on a dart game or on some sort of darts quiz game or something like that. So all in all, it's a really enjoyable game.
It's funny how you say that, Colin, about the way you move the hand to get to the treble 20, because I sort of go very slightly down to the right and then up at an angle and then quickly flick up. It's weird how you went the other way around, but yeah, it's much the same. You get a certain way how you play it.
Yeah, and my strategy is probably a little bit different again. I think I go bottom left, then right, and then up left for some reason, like in a diamond shape almost. But you'll see that on the video because obviously the video footage is me playing it. So firstly, it should be mentioned that this is obviously not a traditional sports game, you know, like a tennis or golf or something like that. But it is generally considered to be one of the best Mastertronic released in the sports range, and I couldn't really pick anything better in good conscience. So as you said, it's pretty realistic dart sim. It is quite easy to master the controls and get 180s after a few tries. The checkouts for getting the doubles are a little bit more tricky. They do take a little bit more effort to try and get the hand in the right place. Graphics wise, as you said, they're as good as they can be for a darts game, but the sort of comical style look of the opponents with the big beer bellies and stuff are quite well done, even though there is a lot of brown and yellow, as you mentioned, Simon. It's also got some nice speech when you get a 180, you know, a typical 180, so that's quite nice. I do think it would be better if you could skip the opponent's goes by pressing the fire button, because it does get a bit boring after a while watching them throw their 3 darts. And as you've said, the tournament mode, pretty easy once you master the controls, except for Jammy Jim, who never misses. And I feel like it would have been good if they put some AI on him, where if you got a 180, there's like a random chance he'll mess up his next throw, and that'll then give you a chance to take it, rather than him just being absolutely impossible to beat unless you play a perfect game. So that's a bit of a shame in terms of making it a bit more competitive, but it doesn't really stop it being a good darts game. I do like the round the clock. I'd not played that before until I played it again for doing this review. I had about 4 or 5 goes of it in a row, finally managed it with 2 seconds to spare, so I was quite happy with that. And yeah, overall, you know what you're getting. If you like darts, you'll like it. If you're not really a fan of darts, you probably won't, but it's very well done. I don't think there's a better darts simulation on any computer that I've encountered.
There is one on the Atari 8-bit. Thorny MI used to do games on there, and they have got darts game. The graphics are set in a pub, and the dartboard isn't as well drawn, but it's in the corner of the screen. The one thing I liked about that game, I thought they could have maybe incorporated into 180, but I suppose for a budget game they weren't going to invest the time in the programming, is having the wire come into play so you can actually hit the wire. Because the Thorny MI game, it's a really old game. I used to see it in Silica Shop in about 1980, 81 when I first saw it, and it's really good for its time. And then that you can actually hit the wire, you hear the clink, and the dart flies out and lands on the floor. So that could have maybe something that they could have added in. That could have given a bit more variety if it hits the wire or something like that. But yeah, to review the game, I have to say what they call you in it. It's Mega Zarjazz, man.
Yeah, as dart simulators go, it is definitely Mega Zarjazz. Okay, well, let's move on to the next game, and if darts was a bit of a non-traditional sports game, then where do we put Raging Beast, also known as Olay on the title screen, a bullfighting simulation released in 1986 by Firebird in their Silver Range packaging for £1.99. This one was created by French coder Francois Lyonnais, better known as Jorks, and the music was done by Jim Cuomo. You must enter the arena and make as many passes as possible using only your red cloak. If you last long enough in the ring with the mighty bull Alfonso, a loot will be thrown from the crowd which you'll have to place over the bull's head. If you succeed, then glory will be yours, but you'll have to re-enter the ring to face Alfonso again, and he'll be even angrier. This is another one that the magazines were very complimentary about. Zap gave it an overall score of 89%, calling it a highly entertaining piece of software, which they also said was immediately addictive, tough and fun to play. And Commodore User gave it a similar score of 8 out of 10, ending their review by saying Firebird must score full marks for originality and value. Colin, first thing I have to mention here is that you actually donated your copy of this to me for reviewing on my Silverbird Selection series, so thank you very much for that. So let's hear your thoughts on it first.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to hand that over to you for your collection. It's a game that I had back in the day and used to play it quite regularly. Sort of a game that you wouldn't play for long, but you just sort of go back for a bit of a short go every now and then, really. It's a very original game. You sort of, not another one like it that I know of on another system. Maybe there is, but I've never come across it. Basically, you're the matador in the ring with a bull. You've got to try and get the bull to sort of come towards the red rag that you're holding, and eventually, after you've done that several times, this ring gets struck into the ring that you've got to try and get on the bull. Sometimes you get onto the bull's back, and sometimes you stay on there longer than other times. I've never really been able to work out how you actually get to stay on there. It just seems to be potluck how long you're on there for. The game doesn't take itself too seriously. There's a fair bit of humour in the game. Like when you get trampled by the bull, a couple of the guys come on with a stretcher to carry you off, and the bull sort of sits down somewhere and starts clapping. The graphics are quite good. The bull's very well animated, and so is the matador. It's not really enough variation in the game, like I say, to keep you playing for a long time. So it's just like a 20-minute go here and there, really, I think, for this one. But, you know, it's fun while it lasts.
Yeah, couldn't really agree more with any of that you've just said. As you say, lovely graphics and animation, loads of humour in it as well. The music's nice as well, very Spanish sounding music. I do find the controls a little bit frustrating on it. To move faster in one direction, you have to keep pressing the joystick in the same direction, but then to slow down, you have to press it back the opposite direction. So that takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you do get used to it, it's relatively easy to keep under control. Pinpoint precision required for hanging that garland on the bull's horns, that's quite tricky to do, but again, you will get it eventually. I think there are some scoring tricks in it where the more you waggle the red rag, or if you move when the bull's passing you, I think you get more points. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think you do. The scoring's a bit erratic, I find, on it. I'm not very good at this game, and like you, Colin, I've never been able to figure out how you ride the bull. I think you waggle the joystick somehow or rotate it, but I've never been able to quite work it out. It's not a very politically correct game, it has to be said, but because the bull always wins and it's got loads of character, you kind of get away with it. I don't think anyone would do a bullfighting game now, but back then you could get away with a little bit more than you can now. As you say, it is a bit limited as a standalone game. I think this would have been perfect as an event in one of those epic sport games, most obviously World Games I suppose, but it's got the look of that as well, the design of the graphics and everything, and the music as well. It all really looks like it could have been an event in World Games. I think it would have been just ideal for that. But even so, for a £2 game, I think it's really good fun. Simon, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I got this back in the day. I saw the Zap review and thought, oh, that sounds a bit different, a bit fun. So I went out and took the plunge. I do like the music, I must admit. When I loaded it up a couple of days ago to play it for this, I'd forgotten how much I liked it, to be honest. It's very Spanish, as you said. It is a bit simplistic, the gameplay, but it's good how it works. Even the little bit of cloth, the red rag, looks pretty good as it flutters to the ground as the ball pitches you onto its back from its horns. I like that poster at the end, has your name on it, your score, the Toreador, like a poster on the wall. that is what they do in Spain. And my friend was Spanish and he came back with one for me, some famous bullfighter on it. I used to have up my bedroom, very similar to that picture, to be honest. So I think that's a nice sort of cultural touch there. But yeah, it's pretty fun and it's completely different bullfighting. You don't get that. And I couldn't agree more with you, Mount. You said about being in World Games. That would have been pretty cool. It is that sort of look. Definitely the animation of the ball. You can imagine that being in an Epics game. But yeah, I really like it. It's different. And as Colin said, it's just a 20 minutes quick blast every now and again. But I definitely will be putting it on again. I might give it another go and see if I can work out how to stay on the ball and get quite a good score. So good fun. And I was glad to play it again for this.
Yeah, I should have mentioned this is a bit of a left field choice and you might wonder why this was chosen, but honestly there are no real good traditional sports games released by Firebird in the budget range, so that's why we chose Raging Beast, because it got the best Zap review and there really weren't any better options. The thing you said about the poster, I also like when you fail and you're trampled, the poster at the end will say that you're in hospital. It's in Spanish but it's like en hospital or something like that, so that's a nice touch as well. The poster changes depending on whether you're successful or not.
I like the plane flying over as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another great touch, isn't it? With the banner coming over with your score on, and Jorks is the name of the programmer. So sometimes it says that you love Jorks and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and really loads of detail in it, even though it's a fairly straightforward game. It's all the detail and character in it that really makes it really playable. Okay, let's move on to the final game for this round then, which is a bit more of a traditional sports game. The Codemasters game is Pro Tennis Simulator. This was a 1989 release costing £2.99. This one was created by Gavin Rayburn, who did the coding, graphics and music for the game. The gameplay is viewed from above and behind the net with a slight 3D effect, and the type of shot played is determined by how high the ball is as you hit it. There are 3 computer skill levels on offer and matches can be 1, 3 or 5 sets. Full service rules are implemented, so the fire button must be pressed once to throw the ball up and a second time to hit it with the racket. Strangely, no reviews for this one in any of the magazines I could find, not for the Commodore 64 version anyway, but I did base it on the Lemon score, which was like 7 out of 10 or something like that, and also I played a few other Codemasters sports games, and again this was the best one, which was a bit surprising actually, because Codemasters is typically sort of known for the sports simulations, and actually a lot of those simulations aren't very good. So there you go. This is another Codemasters one that's got nice presentation. You've got game options for the number of games in a set. There's a demo mode, there's music on the title screen, so lots of nice touches there. You can play 1 or 2 players obviously. It alternates between like a clay and a grass court, but that's not actually an option. The in-game graphics are pretty good too. You've got that variation of court colours which mixes things up a bit. One thing I did notice about this is that the court in the background fills the whole screen, including the borders, so there's been some funky programming tricks used to put multiple colours in the borders to make it look like the court's filling the entire screen, so that's quite clever from a technical point of view. It's a bit of a shame that the 2 players look exactly the same. Would have been nice if you could choose what your player looked like maybe, or something like that. The most important thing really is the actual playability of it, and I found this to be really good after being a bit frustrating to start with. Once I got into it I really enjoyed it. The ball movement's good, it's pretty realistic, but it's slow enough to be able to get in position to do the shots. There's lots of different shots you can play, you know, lobs, slices and all those kind of things. The serving is quite erratic, it takes a lot of goes to get it right, and you get a lot of double faults when you first start playing, but once you get to grips with when to hit the ball, that gets easier as well. It took me a load of games and I was just losing match after match where I barely won a point, but then it finally clicked, and eventually once I got how to react to the computer I did actually manage to beat it. So what I found was the computer does a lot of lobs, so you have to just work out where the ball's going to drop and then you can hit it left or right of them at the net, and you can win a lot of shots that way. But also the computer player comes to the net almost all the time, so you end up with loads of these battles at the net where you're literally just hitting the button trying to hit it back, and it just keeps going and you nearly always lose those battles every time. So yeah, this one, when I first played it I'm like, this is annoying and frustrating, but the more I played it my opinion changed, and I think it's not perfect, but it's a decent tennis game, and another one that's probably better with 2 players than against the computer. So those were my thoughts on Pro Tennis, which I'd never played before doing this review. Boggy, what were yours?
Very much similar to you. It took a while to get the hang of it. But yeah, once I managed to start getting the serves right, getting them quite far into the corner where the computer player couldn't get them. So I was literally winning games to love. But as you say, when you got into those battles at the net, it's very hard to beat it. It used to hit it away from you. I managed to get it on a lob once, but only once. I think it's not a bad tennis game. I mean, I grew up with the early days of Cyan tennis was quite a nice game. And even Activision tennis on the 2600, that's quite a variety of movement of the ball, but a similar sort of viewpoint. But yeah, pretty good, I thought, for a budget game. Once I got the hang of it, I quite enjoyed it. Like you, I started winning points and started getting games. I thought the ball was a bit crazy. It seems to be massive on the other side when the serve's happening, but it seems to get smaller when it's coming towards you, and it shouldn't really be the other way around. I thought I was just getting faulted for a bug in the game. Then I realised it was giving me a foot fault when I was doing the serve.
Oh, really? I didn't notice that.
I think I must have moved forward or something because I was getting a fault even though my serve was in. And the fact you can hit the top of the net and then the ball can still go over, which a lot of tennis games of that era don't do. The only thing I didn't like was the crowd sounded like a snake hissing in the background. But apart from that, I thought the whole game was actually quite fun, and I think not a bad choice for that price.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a bit of a pleasant surprise for me because my general experience with some Codemasters games is they're all just impossible to play. You know, they look great, they sound great, they've got nice presentation on the title screen and everything, but they can be quite unforgiving. But this one, actually being able to beat a computer player at a sports game is quite a rarity, I think, on the 8-bits, so I was quite pleased with that. Colin, what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, much the same as you two. I mean, it's a game I've never played before. My favourite tennis game of all time is Pete Sampras tennis, but obviously that's a lot newer than this. And this actually played pretty well. Like you say, it's getting the serving right. I find you have to hit the ball at the right height to get it in the right place over the net. But once you got used to that and used to the way the ball sort of moves and working out where it's going to land, you could actually play a pretty decent game of tennis and, like you say, beat the computer every now and then. On the whole, the graphics are quite nice. And if I was buying that back in the day as a budget price, I'd been more than happy.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, no one can go and play a round of tennis and be good at it from the start, so perhaps it's fair that it takes a little bit of getting used to.
Yeah, a little bit of realism there, isn't it? Yeah, you sort of practice makes perfect, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings that round to an end, and it's time now to do the rankings. I'll go first on this one, and first I got to say all three of these games were very good, I thought. For budget price games, they're all very playable, nothing really bad to say about any of them. So it's quite hard to put these in an order, but I'm going to do that, and we've all got to. So in third place, I'm going to go with 180. It's a good darts game, but I'm not that big a fan of darts, so while it is good, it's not really my kind of game. Second, I'm going to go with Pro Tennis Simulator, which was a well-made game that gets better the more you play it, and I really quite enjoyed that one. But in first place, I'm going to go with Raging Beast, which is a simple idea with limited depth, but it's perfectly executed and beautifully presented. Simon, what were your picks on this one?
I'm going to go for Pro Tennis Sim as my third choice. It was pretty good fun, but I have other tennis games that I probably prefer and played more. I'm going to put Raging Beast second because that is a great game, atmospheric, and it does portray bullfighting excellently, so it is good fun. But I'm going for 180 as my top game. That's the one I play literally anytime I switch to 64 on, I have a game of it. And I only beat Jammy Jim more recent times. I didn't ever beat him back in the day. So the fact that I have actually beaten him when I'm an old git with lesser reflexes, it means a lot to me. It's one of the games I play all the time since the time it came out. So I can't not put it top. So purely for that reason.
Good reason to do so. If you've loved that game for years, then of course it's going to come out on top, and that's fair enough. And they're all good games, as I said, so I think any one of these is a good choice for top one, to be honest. So Colin, what were your rankings for this round?
In third place, I went for Raging Beast, just because I'd like to have a bit more variation in the game, a bit more to do. Let's say it's good for like a little 10-20 minute sort of gaming session, but that's about it. Second, I've gone for Pro Tennis Simulator because you can have a good game of tennis and it's quite a decent game. But like Simon, number one is 180, again because I had it back in the day. It's one of my go-to games for the Commodore 64 as well. And I think on our Let's Talk Retro YouTube channel, not long after we started it, I did a top 10 Commodore 64 games, and I think that was in first place even on that, I think.
Wow.
So yeah, that's my rankings.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well, what's interesting there is that we each ranked them slightly differently, unlike the first round. So what that means is that for round 8, in third place with 5 points is Pro Tennis Simulator. In second place with 6 points is Raging Beast. And in first place with 7 points is 180. So very close on that round, unlike the first one. Okay, thanks guys for your thoughts on those sports games from various genres. So let's move on now to round 9 and our final round for this episode, which is motorsport or racing games if you prefer. So for Mastertronic, we're going to be looking at Formula 1 Simulator. Representing Firebird, we've got International Speedway, and representing Codemasters, we've got Slicks. So first up, we're going to look at the Mastertronic game Formula 1 Simulator. This was a 1985 release in Mastertronic's iconic grid-style packaging, costing £1.99. It was developed by Sean Southern from Mr. Chip Software with music from Rob Hubbard. It's described as a realistic simulation of Formula 1 racing on the world's top 8 circuits. Get your braking points and line through corners right, hold the car on the tyre squealing limit, overtaking the other cars if you can, and experience all the speed and excitement of motor racing. Each lap completed adds to your score. I could only find the one review for this game in the magazines, and it was a pretty average one. Zap gave it 54%, saying it's an average racing game, look at others before you buy. So this is another Sean Southern game. This is the third episode in a row that's had one of his games in it, which shows just how important he was to Mastertronic as part of Mr. Chip Software. And this game sold over 400,000 copies across all formats, so it's pretty much the obvious pick, even if it wasn't necessarily very highly regarded. So the first thing you'll get when you load this game is a great Rob Hubbard tune. It's actually worth loading up just to listen to the tune and watch the demo before you even start the game. When you do start the game, it's a pretty generic sort of pole position clone. There's lots of tracks to choose from, but there's not much variety in those tracks in terms of the scenery. I think the mountains are different colour in the background of some of them, but there's no roadside objects or anything like that, so it's fairly bland in that respect. The steering wheel that moves in the middle of the screen's a nice touch, fairly superfluous but a nice touch nonetheless. There's no track overview when you're actually playing the game, or even a start or finish line, so it is very bare bones in some respects, and the graphics for the cars are quite basic as well. There's no movement on them either, but the simulation of speed's pretty good, typical sort of multicoloured stripes down the side of the road to simulate that, and it does look like it's moving at a fair rate of knots. The sounds are pretty basic, it's just your normal engine noises and things like that. It's got a bit of a strange way of playing in much as you're just playing for a high score. There's no position or ranking to fight for, so you don't sort of start in last place and try and make your way up to first. You just drive 8 laps, I think it is, and you do get a bonus if you complete it for the number of cars passed. It's a bit odd that you don't really play in a competitive way against the other drivers. It's literally just an arcade style racing game, I suppose. The control of the car is pretty decent though, it moves reasonably well. You use the fire button to change gear, which is a reasonable sort of way of doing things, and it automatically accelerates, so you don't have to worry about accelerating too much, so that works pretty well. It's pretty simplistic, it gets boring after a while of playing, I would say, by modern standards of course, but if you're a racing game fan in 1985, there's really nothing wrong with it for £2, and I'm a bit surprised that Zap only gave it 54% to be honest. Colin, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's quite easy to see why Mastertronic actually sold so many copies of this. For the time, it was a decent game. I remember at my school, it was almost like legendary. I think everyone that had a 64 had a copy. Everyone was playing it and comparing scores and stuff. That's what it mainly is, isn't it? It's like you just keep going and chase your high score all the time. So it's not like really like a race as in a race. It's just so many cars you can get by and how high a score you can get. But the scrolling's quite good and the Rob Hubbard tune's good. For 199, it's a really decent game. If I remember rightly, you don't actually accelerate. It's just like low and high gear, but you can pull back on the joystick to brake and slow down a little bit.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
But yeah, I say at my school everyone was playing it and really enjoying it, and it's still not a bad game to sort of stick on and play for a little bit today.
Yeah, I agree with that. Simon, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, amazingly, I never had this one, even though I know people were talking about it and people were playing it at school. I saw the Zap review and I just didn't bother with it, even for $1.99. I didn't get the game. So somehow I've got a copy for the Commodore 16 on my shelf in my bedroom for some reason. Even though I haven't got a C16, I was going to get one, I never got around to it. But yeah, the game itself, I didn't like the card sprite, it was poor. It's square and flat, like a double bed with some wheels added to it, which I thought was a bit strange. But I disagree a little bit with you chaps, because I didn't think the portrayal of speed was all that. As you say, it's a standard racing game. The red and white stripes on the edge of the track, that was the thing that portrayed the speed more than the road. But in an era when revs was around, and I know it's a lot more money, but you can see what could have been done. I mean, Jeff Craven was a legend of those. I just didn't really enjoy it, to be honest. Like you say, with no positions, if you're at least fighting for a qualification and try and get into an actual Grand Prix or something, it would have been quite nice. The only Grand Prix on it is you just go through all the tracks trying to get high scores. And as you say, no trackside furniture, no signs. And I tried Silverstone and mountains in the background. I don't remember any mountains in Northamptonshire myself, but so yeah, I didn't find it particularly. I think I prefer things like Enduro on the 2600, which Speed King was a better game, I think, for that kind of era, for a racing game. For myself, I actually much preferred it, but obviously I'm looking back at rose-tinted spectacles, I suppose, because I didn't really play one simulator. But it was okay for $1.99. I suppose it did the job, and it wasn't awful, but I can't say I'd really want to play it again or really enjoy it, to be honest.
No, I think it's of its time, but what you said about Speed King, that is a better game for sure, and that was released by Mastertronic for $1.99 as well, but it's a re-release of a game originally published by Digital Integration, so it doesn't qualify because it's a re-release. But yeah, that is a good game and definitely better than this. But I think this game's of its time, I think it was pretty decent, but looking back on it, if you never played it before, it's probably fairly average. So let's move on to the next game. This is the Firebird offering for this round, and it's International Speedway. This is a 1988 release in the Silverbird packaging, costing £1.99. This one was developed for Firebird by Probe Software, with coding duties performed by Kevin T. Green, graphics from Stephen Murray, and music from David Dunn. You're a super speedway rider who's been racing your bike on the streets for ages and you reckon you're good enough to take on the rest of the world. You'll start off in the local league, and if you win that, then you'll progress to the national league and ultimately onwards towards the world championship. The very best riders from around the globe have been waiting for a chance like this too, so they're going to fight just as hard as you to be number one. This was another one that got pretty average reviews from the magazines, with Zap giving it 49% and saying there isn't really a great deal you can do with a speedway game. It's race round, look at the scores, race round again. It's not that bad really, just boring. What's interesting about this one though is it looks like it was also going to be released by Codemasters. There's a review of the game in the January 1992 issue of Zap where it was given 58%, and it's definitely the same game because there's a screenshot of it, but I don't think it was ever actually released. There's no evidence online that I could find that it was ever released by Codemasters. So what I think probably happened was Codemasters either realised it wasn't going to do particularly well based on that review, or perhaps they hadn't realised that it had originally been released by Firebird 4 years earlier and not done particularly well that time around. But yeah, that was an interesting note I found about it. Anyway, enough talking about the history of the game. Colin, I know you're a big fan of Speedway and a fan of this game I believe too, so you better start us off on this one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm a big Speedway fan and probably the person that bought this game. I don't know. But yeah, I'm a Swindon Robbins fan, started going to Speedway back in the 80s, and this game gave me the chance to sort of fulfill my Speedway dream and actually becoming an international Speedway rider. The game starts off with a nice tune playing. It's sort of like a motorsporty sort of tune. And then when you start the game, you have to put in your name and then what your nationality is. Basically, the idea of the game is you have different competitions for each area, and it progressively gets harder as you go through. So your local one will be quite an easy round to win. Then you go on to like your national speedway competition, which gets a little bit harder, and eventually you get through to the world championships where it's even harder still. It's not a bad simulation of speedway in many ways. I mean, some people say if you gate first and get out in first, then you're going to win the race. But that's speedway, that often does happen. And then also if you hit another rider, you get slowed down, so you're probably not going to have much chance of winning the race. And again, that happens in speedway. If you hit another rider, you're going to try not to come off your bike and you're going to be at the back and you have to try and catch up. One thing the game does give you is a speed boost, so if you do that on the straight, can help you try and get back into contention of winning. But I find that if I do hit another player and get sort of towards the back, I can sometimes, if you take the inside line, just like in speedway, you can get underneath the other riders and get back to the front. The screen's split into sort of two sections. You've got the top section, which is just where the racing takes place. And then you've got the bottom part of the screen has got some pretty pointless stuff really. It's like a track, so you can see whereabouts you're on the track, but it's a speedway track. It just goes around in a circle, so you don't really need to know that. And there's like a speed bar that shows you what speed you're doing, and also a picture of your head for some unknown reason. You can do a false start, just like in speedway, if you go too soon, so you don't want to do too many of those or just get excluded from the race. You know, I found it was a way of living my sort of speedway rider fantasies, if you like, back in the day, and still enjoy it today and give it a play every now and then.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, if it was something you enjoyed watching when you were a kid, then obviously you'd enjoy playing a simulation of it too. I had made notes about the sort of layout of the screen. I suspect the reason for it is mainly because it'll move faster if not the whole screen's being used for the racetrack. But yeah, there's a lot of fairly useless information and status displays in the bottom of, and also a big black space on the right hand side. It doesn't even fill the screen left to right, let alone up to down. But having said that, the graphics are pretty good and it moves pretty quickly, so you can't really complain about it too much. It's got some strange kind of loading bars that it shows before a round starts. I don't think I've ever seen that within a game before. You know, obviously you get those kind of scrambled loading bars when you're loading a game up, but not between sections of a game loading up. So that's a bit odd, but didn't really matter. It was just a bit of a strange thing. The races, for me, I'm not really a speedway fan, so they're fast, but it's fairly boring just driving around in a circle for 3 or 4 laps. It's all about getting a good start and then using that speed boost at the right time. I did like the practice mode. That was a nice addition because it puts a box around you and kind of shows you the correct racing line to be on, so I thought that was quite a nice touch. Overall for me it's a pretty nicely put together game, but it's just a bit boring after a few rounds and there wasn't much impetus for me to try and play it again once I'd played it once. Simon, what are your thoughts on this one?
I'd never played it before. It came out in 88. I'd got an Amiga in 87 and from 64 I was taking a back seat by then, to be honest. But yeah, after trying it, I was pleasantly surprised. I think it does depict Speedway pretty well. I even used to watch a bit of Speedway when I was a teenager. You saw on telly quite a lot, and Motorsport and stuff like that. And that nipping in on the inside and just trying to keep your line and trying to get past the guys, because they are pretty good, the computer guys on it. You know, you hit one of them, it's very hard to get back in. But the excitement for me was once you're on the league table, if you're like a point ahead of pack and you're just like, oh, you made a mess of one race and you got the last race, and it added a bit of excitement there. I actually quite like the graphics. I thought they did what they had to do. I mean, a bit of mud flying up maybe off the track. Well, I suppose it's a bit early in the computer days for that kind of thing. Would have been nice. You always Speedway, you always see all the mud flying all over the place. And I just think overall it's pretty good. Presentation was all right. But again, it's a bit like Jammy Jim in 180. You've got to be really on it. Any mistakes, you're pretty much punished like in real Speedway, I would say. So honestly, I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it depicted Speedway pretty good.
One thing I'll add is that if there's like a tie in any of the meetings, then they decide that you've got to rerun the whole meeting again, which normally you'd probably just perhaps have a ride-off against the two that came sort of joint at the top of the table. So that's a bit annoying that you've got to go through the whole meeting again just to sort of get a winner, and then you could also draw again and you've got to play it again over and over sort of thing, you know?
Getting an infinite loop rather like the track. Yeah. That's a bit of a strange decision, and it's something that could have quite easily been done differently rather than having to redo the whole thing.
Like I say, just a race-off between the tied riders. Whoever wins that then wins it.
Yeah, absolutely. So is Speedway, I don't know anything about Speedway, I must admit. Do you only do 3 laps or 4 laps or something like that?
4 laps, yeah.
Okay,
just 4 laps a race, yeah, and then over 15 races in a meeting.
Yeah, I've learned a little bit about Speedway at least by playing this game and talking to you guys, so at least I got something positive out of it. It wasn't a terrible game by any means. I think just the idea of driving round in a circle just didn't appeal to me that much, but there you go, each to their own. So that was International Speedway. Let's move on to the final game for this episode and this round, which is Slicks, released by Codemasters in 1992. By this point, budget games cost £3.99, so that's what it cost. This one was created by Ashley Routledge and Dave Saunders for digital design, with music from Alistair Brimble, and it's an overhead view Formula 1 racing simulation, which gives you the chance to race and beat the best drivers in the world. The championship season is raced over 6 circuits and there are 5 drivers to compete against. You begin by racing for Benetton and will compete against Ferrari, Lotus, Brabham, McLaren and Williams. You have the option of racing a full season or practicing first to hone your skills, and if you fancy racing against a friend then there's also a 2-player option. Zach reviewed this in October 1992 and gave it a score of 83%, saying it's a shame there aren't more circuits to race on, but Slicks plays extremely well in both 1 and 2 player modes and is better value than a used Metro. Commodore Format were also impressed, giving it a similar score of 83%. Boggy, what were your thoughts on this one?
Again, not a game I'd played before. I thought it was pretty good. The overhead view was excellent. I really quite liked the graphics of it. The little Formula 1 cars looked good. Nice to have some teams like Benetton and the teams of the time in the game. Yeah, it was interesting. Obviously, it's probably, I'd say, a more advanced version of the Super Sprint, I suppose, because you scroll around the track. And I was pleasantly surprised with it. It is obviously hard to master. It's like any Formula 1 game I've ever played. You've got to be so careful when you're driving it. I kept going off the side of the track, and then obviously you hit the tyres at speed, or you hit any obstacle, the car blows up, and it's in bits, and that's the end of your race. But just like Formula 1, they come off the track, they hit the wall, they're out of it. I started to get the hang of it a bit. I started to get round corners without coming off, but I could never get near the other drivers, even when I was doing all right. And then eventually they'd lap me. The AI was pretty good, so that's just the way it is with Formula 1 games. It's like that in most of them, really, unless you have it on a very silly mode, which some games have. It was still fun. I love the overhead view. And I think there's a lot of game there, really, with the whole Grand Prix side of it, the qualifying, and also you can practice. I think it's a pretty good challenge and a great little game.
Thank you very much for your thoughts on it. Colin, what were your thoughts on this one?
My thoughts are slightly different. I mean, it looks absolutely amazing, the game. You know, the view of it looking down, it's very detailed, all the graphics, and it looks really, really nice. I really want to like it, but my problem with it is the controls. I think it's just too hard. You can't stay on the track. I'm just always coming off and crashing. And as soon as you crash, like you say, that's game over. I know, like Simon says, that is what racing is. If you do come off and you crash, that's the end of the game sort of thing, isn't it? But yeah, I just couldn't get over that. It just spoiled it for me, didn't make it fun at all, made it very frustrating. But like I say, graphically, it looks absolutely amazing. I really want to like it, but the fact that I can't get anywhere on it, you know, even practicing. I have actually played it on an emulator using a D-pad rather than a joystick, which makes it a little bit easier. But you know, maybe it's just me, but I just find it too hard.
Fair enough. I mean, some games are like that, aren't they? You struggle to gel with them. I'd never played it before doing this series, and lots of people raved about it, saying it's one of the best budget games. I'm not sure I'd go quite that far, but I did enjoy it. The presentation and the graphics are excellent. I mean, you've got lots of options on the title screen. You can do a practice, you get to put your name in and all that kind of stuff. It's got a good selection of tracks. I think there's 6 tracks, and they're reasonably well recreated for a top-down view. It would be good if you could see the layout of the track in game, the usual sort of overhead view of the track in the corner that a lot of racing games have, or maybe even just some warnings of turns coming up, because the number of times you just go crashing into a turn because you've got no idea what the layout is can get a little bit frustrating. In terms of the playability, I didn't have too much trouble with the controls. It's a fast-paced game for sure, but the scrolling is really smooth and the position of the car is good so that you're never too close to running into a bend as long as you react quickly enough. A nice little touch was that you could have a rivalry with other drivers, so you could challenge another driver, and if you beat them in the next race, then you'd move into their team and they drop into yours. And the difference that made was that their cars had a faster top speed, so you could get a faster car and therefore challenge the next person up to work your way up the rankings. I don't think 6 races there is enough to actually make it to the top, because you're starting the lowest or setting lowest quality car, so you'd have to challenge the next person up every race and beat them to then have a car fast enough to beat the next person up. So it's a bit flawed, but it's a nice idea. As you've said, it's very harsh that one crash wipes you out of the race completely. That is authentic, but come on, we're playing computer games here. At least give you 3 attempts and it puts you back on the track and you go again. Crashing in qualifying and not getting a qualifying time, or crashing into some tyres and you're out of the race completely, was a little bit too harsh, and that did spoil it a little bit. And also, sometimes you never see another driver once the race starts. If you maintain your speed but you've not got the fastest car, you can't catch up with anyone in front of you and you're too fast for everyone behind you, and you just drive around the whole track in complete isolation. So there's not really much racing in it, so it's definitely got some flaws. Having said that, the whole game is, ironically, a very slickly made game. Everything about it is really well done, and I think had it been released a bit earlier in the Commodore 64's life, it might have been a full price game, because I think it's better than most budget games even of that time. Also, it's got a 2-player mode, which I've obviously never played, but I bet that's pretty good fun as well, giving you the sort of Micro Machines style competitive kind of thing. So I see this as a bit of a forerunner to Micro Machines, really. Not the look of it, but the overhead view and the slick scrolling and all that kind of stuff. It really does feel like this was one step in the evolution that ended up with Micro Machines on the Mega Drive and the other consoles that it came out on. So yeah, I was really impressed with this one.
Yeah, I did like the 2-player game. I actually went into it by accident when I was messing about with the menus. So I just raced one car ahead until it gave you the 8 or 9, I think it is, dots at the bottom that fill in as you beat the other car. And that was quite a nice touch, actually. I think 2 people could have a bit of fun with that.
Yeah, that's very like Micro Machines as well. That's exactly what happens in that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's basically just like the same thing. You go ahead, as soon as you get too far ahead off the edge of the screen, you win that point.
Oh, that sounds really good. It was definitely a nicely put together package with a few flaws, and it was quite hard to get into. So there we go, that's it. That's the end of the 3rd round of this episode, round 9 overall. Let's do some rankings then. And Colin, do you want to do this one first?
Yeah, I'll go first. After what I've just said, this might be a little bit surprising, but in 3rd place, I'm going to go with Formula 1 Simulator. I'm going to put in 2nd place Slicks, even though I didn't really enjoy it, and I can't get over the fact that, when you just crash, you're out of the game. It's more of an arcade game to me than a simulator for a change. They've actually not called it Simulator, being a Codemasters game. But yeah, I'm going to put that in 2nd place, just because even though I'm throwing my joystick across the room all the time when I play it, I think there's people that do enjoy it, and it's much better put together game than Formula 1 Simulator. And probably no surprise though, number 1 for me is International Speedway. Just for all the reasons that I said before, it's a game that I played back in the day. I love Speedway and I still really enjoy playing it today as well.
Absolutely, and no better reason than that to make it your number 1 choice. Thank you very much. So Simon, do you want to go second this time and let us know your rankings?
Yeah, I would join Colin with Formula 1 Simulator as the 3rd game. It was a bit underwhelming to me, really. It was just not put together that well. I thought so much more they could have made of that. I'm going to put Slick 2nd. Similar reasons with the harshness of, one crash and you're out. But I did love the look and feel of the game. It's pretty good for a budget game, I will say that. And I probably will go back to it and give it a good play to see how I get on. And like kind of my top choice is International Speedway. I wasn't a fan of Speedway, but I found it fun. I actually enjoyed the racing on it. I found the league tables part of it, trying to keep at the top or trying to catch up. It was the best one of the 3 for me, the sort of combination of playability and looks. And it's the one I've got the most enjoyment from.
Okay, thanks guys. Well, you two have agreed exactly, but I'm going to beg to differ on this one, because in 3rd place, I'm going to go with International Speedway. It's just not for me. It's fairly well made, but I found it boring. And in 2nd place, I'm going to go with Formula 1 Simulator. It lacks the bells and whistles of later games, but it was a great game for the price at the time. And in 1st place, I'm going to go with Slicks. It's a top quality overhead view racing game and a bit of a budget classic, or at least that's what lots of other people told me, and I tend to agree with them, although I don't think I'd put it in my overall top 10 despite it being a good game. So that means that the final scores for that round: in 3rd place with 4 points is Formula 1 Simulator, and we actually have a tie for 1st place with 7 points each. It's International Speedway and Slicks, so everybody's happy.
Well, no, surely it's like International Speedway. We have to go through the whole of this round again.
No, let's not do that. That's it for this final round of this episode. So just to give you some overall scores now. So for this episode, in third place with 16 points was Firebird with their 3 games. Second place with 17 points was Mastertronic. And in first place with 21 points and winning the second episode in a row, Codemasters. But when we get to the overall scores, not much has really changed. So when we look at the leaderboard, in third place with 52 points is Firebird. Second place with 54 points is Mastertronic. And first place with 56 points is Codemasters. So there's still only a very small number of points between third and first place, and anyone could still win it with 2 episodes and 7 rounds still to go. Thanks guys for sharing your thoughts on those 9 games across 3 rounds. Hopefully you've enjoyed playing most of them, if there are a couple of duffers in there. So just before we round up, I've got a couple of questions for you. The first one is, are there any games from the 3 publishers that you'd have chosen instead of the ones I've chosen for the categories we've covered?
I don't think there are really, not from the ones that were not re-releases anyway. One game that was a re-release that I used to enjoy playing, which was a bit strange, was Jonah Barrington's Squash. But obviously that was a re-release. So, I think you basically covered the ones that I would have thought were the best ones to take a look at for this video. Okay,
great. Thank you for validating my choices. Simon, what about you?
Yeah, I'm the same. I don't think in these categories there was much else or anything different. I don't think there's anything out there that I would have replaced any of them with.
Okay, thanks. There is one game that I had Formula 1 Simulator not sold so many copies and been so popular in the day, I probably would have chosen Night Racer, the Mastertronic game, which incidentally was programmed by Kevin Green, who also programmed International Speedway. I think that's probably a better game than Formula 1 Simulator, but it's definitely not as well known, and it didn't actually get a very good review in Zap either. But I think that's quite a decent game, Night Racer, but I think Formula 1 Simulator was the only choice, given that it sold 400,000 copies or something like that. So let's move on to the next question, which is simply, out of the 9 games we've reviewed, which one would you say everyone must play?
Well, as much as I love 180, I think the game that everyone needs to give a go, they probably haven't, is Raging Beast. It's just something different, the ball and the personality it's got, and there isn't any other bullfighting game that I know of. There are other tennis sims, other driving games, but there isn't other bullfighting games. So I think out of all the ones we've covered, that one would be the one I suggest people try.
Yeah, absolutely, and one that perhaps people overlooked simply because it's about bullfighting and it's not a particularly good thing to be playing necessarily. But as we've said, the bull always wins in the end, so there's nothing to worry about if you do want to play it. So yeah, that's a great choice. Colin, what would be your must-play game?
Raging Beast is a good choice, and again, I love 180, but obviously it's got to be International Speedway for me. A lot of people would probably overlook that as well, so I think it's worth giving it a go and see whether they like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? I'm going to be a bit more obvious with my choice simply because I'd never played it before and I feel like I need to big it up a little bit now that I have, and I'm going to go for Slicks, which is the slickest budget game that I've played from this 9. Funny that no one chose a football game as a must-play. Thanks guys again, and finally one last question. We're now 9 rounds in with 7 to go. Which publisher do you think will win this competition overall? Simon?
Probably say Mastertronic, to be honest. It's the well-known. I know Codemasters, again, are very well-known. All of them are, really. Codemasters, with all the simulators and stuff, they did pump out a lot of games at the time. They were pretty good presentationally and graphically. Gameplay wasn't always great, but for me, they all produced some good stuff. They all produced some crap. So
yeah, well, that's very true.
I've got no particular loyalty to anyone. I quite like some of the Firebird games at the time. Some of them came out were pretty good. Each company produced some decent games overall. I think the quality got better as time went on. But then you still sometimes had some of the early ones that are actually pretty sound as well. But I think Mastertronic, just with their overall games, I just think they might be able to take it here.
Okay, well, we know you're a big Mastertronic fan, Colin, because you're soon to publish a book about all of their games. So what do you think? Are Mastertronic going to win out, or do you think it might be one of the other 2?
Yeah, I've got a feeling that Mastertronic are just going to sneak it. It's going to be tight, like it is now. But I think at the end of the day, Mastertronic have probably just got slightly the better titles and the better well-known titles. So yeah, I think they'll sneak it.
Yeah, it's probably worth noting that Mastertronic released almost double the number of games that Firebird and Codemasters did, so they have got a pretty wide library to pick from, even if not all of them were the greatest games. So yeah, that may well be how it turns out. We'll find out when the remaining 2 episodes are completed. So that is it. Huge thank you to Colin and Simon for sharing their thoughts on the games, and indeed having to play some of them was probably a bit hard work, especially those football games, so I really appreciate you putting the time in. Guys, have you got anything left that you want to say? Feel free to spout off, but not both at the same time.
I'll let Simon go first if he wants.
I was going to say, I've just moved into a new place and I've got my 64 permanently set up now, and it's good to be able to go back and start playing games again, and I've just enjoyed doing this because even the ones that weren't that great, some of them I hadn't played, and it's good to go back and play it. So I'm going to start playing a lot more games. Might even try all the ones from the other rounds as well, just to see. And I'm going to start putting some more stuff from Retro Games Forever about it, so that should be good.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking part. Colin, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your book?
Yeah, well, first I'd like to say thanks for having me on. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun hanging out with you two. But yeah, my Mastertronic book, it was a project I started putting together during lockdown, and it started off basically just as a catalogue I was putting together in my collection because I just finished collecting all the Mastertronic games. Eventually it just seemed to start growing into a book. I started adding what I called feature pages on certain things like the Aqua game that was given away free on the magazine and the light phaser light gun and things like that. So it just sort of grew and grew. And then I thought, well, maybe I'd like to share it with other people that are into Mastertronic as well. So I sent a PDF over it to Chris Wilkins at Fusion Retro Books. And I said, well, you've got the experience of putting these things out. Do you fancy doing it? And he said, yes. So the Kickstarter has gone live and got funded within the first sort of 12 hours or so. So it's definitely going to happen. And I think he's hoping to have the books back from the printers in August, if I'm right. Unfortunately, by the time this airs, the Kickstarter campaign would have finished, but I'm sure that Chris will have some copies available on his website when the book's actually back from the printers.
Yeah, we'll put a link to the Kickstarter in the video comments, even though it's finished, so you can have a bit more of a read about it if you're interested, and also a link to Fusion Retro so you can know where to go to buy the book when it does get released. Colin kindly provided me with some sample pages from the book, which I've been displaying on screen, and as you can see, there's lots of interesting information in there, not just the pictures and stuff like that, but there's obviously a nice review of, is it every game's going to get a review or the majority?
Well, every game, yeah. I think the only ones is sort of like the Tronics games, and then the Racket ones, they're just like mainly listed with a few pictures.
Yeah, thank you, Colin, and good luck with the book. One last question. Let's Talk Retro sort of went a little bit into hibernation during the lockdown. Are you going to be back at some point, do you think?
Possibly, I'm not sure. I mean, at the moment, me and James are both sort of doing different things, and James used to just work across the road from me, so it was easy for him to pop round of an evening to put some videos together. But he's since changed jobs and is working in a different place and things, so it's a bit harder to get together now. But, you know, I think I'd like to do some more eventually, so we'll have to see what happens. Okay,
we'll watch this space on that score then. But we'll put a link to Let's Talk Retro in the comments as well, so you can go and check out all their content from before lockdown. Well, thanks again for participating. Apart from the football games, it was pretty good actually. I think most of the games were quite playable, so I was pretty happy with that round. I'm quite surprised it's come out so even. I was not expecting you both to rank International Speedway top. You know, your opinion is your opinion and perfectly as valid as mine, which is exactly why I wanted to get two other people doing it and not just me, because my opinion on almost every round has been different to everybody else's, so it evens things out a little bit.
It helps if you enjoy the Speedway.
Of course,
Simon, like he says, watched a little bit as well, so if you know a little bit about it.
Brought back my old days of watching World of Sport with my dad in the Saturday afternoon when we went to football.
Yeah.
There was a bit on there then, remember it?
Was there any darts on there as well?
Yeah, a bit of darts.
Darts, football, no bullfighting though, I imagine, on World of Sport.
Not a lot of it that I remember. World of Sport in Spain, Mike.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, on that note, it's time to blow the final whistle on episode 3 of the Commodore 64 Budget Publisher Showdown. Taking another look at the leaderboard, we can see that Codemasters have now taken the lead after another great selection of games this time around, but both Mastertronic and Firebird are still very close behind. So there's still all to play for as we go into episode 4, which will be the biggest so far with 4 rounds focusing on 80s gaming essentials. I'll be joined by 2 different guests for that one, so please subscribe if you haven't already done so to make sure you don't miss it. If you've got any thoughts on the games featured in this episode and our rankings for them, then please leave a comment. I'd also love to know which games you'd have chosen for these categories and which publisher you think will win this epic competition. Once again, thanks to Colin and Simon for taking part in this episode, and please check out the links in the pinned comment to see the other projects they're involved with, along with other supplementary material related to this episode. Until the next time, thanks very much for watching and see you soon.